Thank you again, everyone, for coming. My name again is Laura Cavers, Reader Advisor at New Canaan Library. This is the book chat, which happens the second Thursday of every month. And I always have a guest with me. Today I have two. I have Virginia Mcgregor, who is the author of The Children's Secret, which is the focus of our meeting today. And I also have Stacy Walker of Canaan Cares, who read the book and just wants so much to just rave about it as well, and talk about the wonderful points that the book brings. I'm going to introduce Virginia Mcgregor. Since a child, she has always loved stories. And when her mother told her that there were people whose job it was to write those stories, she knew that that's what she wanted to do. She's lived in Germany, in Corsica, and finally moved to Oxford, so she speaks many languages. She taught high school English in the UK, and while she was teaching, that inspired her to try her hand at writing YA stories. And when I say YA stories, I mean young adult stories. Her husband convinced her to take the plunge to become a published writer. Well, here she is, 5 books later. She's written books for YA books as well as adult books. And we're so very happy to have her here. She is zooming in from Concord, New Hampshire, where she lives with her husband, 3 children, and it says 4 cats.
It's actually grown. We have a cat that's just had kittens, so we're currently living with 10 cats. But anyway, Woo! That's another story.
I also just want to say we have another guest, Stacy Walker, here. She has been working at Canaan Cares since 2017. She began her career as a first grade teacher at inner city schools in New York. She realized that mental health and education were integral components to family dynamics. So she created parent workshops, after-school theater clubs for her students, all in keeping to promote wellness and growth within families. Stacy earned her master's in education from New York University. She is a sexual assault crisis advocate, serves on numerous boards, and has piloted programs for Scholastic and Kids in Crisis. So welcome both of you. And I first want to start, of course, with Virginia. Now, what is confusing for some of you is that if you do know of her book, The Children's Secret, she is going by a pen name there as Nina Monroe, but her real name is Virginia Mcgregor. And welcome, Virginia. Welcome to the book chat.
Thank you for having me.
So this book, I will tell people, is a story about, well, the very beginning is an end of school party. Oh, yes. Thank you. If you have, yes. An end of school
sorry,
party.
I've got my big pile of books that I wanted to recommend, and it's all of them. Wait, here, where's my one? There we go.
Yay, there it is. So this is a story about 8 children who are meeting at an end of summer party before school begins. And they don't know each other well, so the parents have gotten together to let them all learn about who they are, because they're about to many of them go into middle school. And so 9 go into a barn, and then a shot rings out and only 8 come out. And so there has been a shooting. No one has died. I'll let you know that right now. No one has died, but only 8 come out of the barn. And so what happens is, of course, the parents start to point fingers, and the children, everyone starts to distance. The community begins to have reverberations, and the kids create a secret because only they know what happened in the barn. And there are reasons why they had done that. And so it's a very compelling read because of the honesty of how people would be reacting. So Virginia, I want to ask you, I mean, is this based on something that you have experienced or know about, or did you have to do a lot of research to be able to write this book?
So all of those things, really. I think all good books have a little bit of personal experience, a bit of research, and then a big dose of imagination. Those are sort of the ingredients that go in. And the inspiration really behind it came when I moved to America from England. As you can hear, my accent is English. 5.5 years ago, I came with my husband and my toddler. I now have 2 American-born children too. And one of the first things that happened was that I was invited to a book club, a little bit like this, book chat, but in person with a group of mums. And it was so comforting to be in a room of young mothers. We spent a lot of time talking about all those issues to do with raising children and, all the tiring and exhausting and frustrating and funny things. And then the conversation turned to this subject where someone raised this question. They said, I think it was linked to a book we were reading, and they said, would you allow your child to play in a house with a firearm? And I remember exactly where I was sitting and how I was feeling. I was pregnant, it was very hot, it was the end of the summer, like the beginning of this book, and the whole world sort of froze for a moment. And I suddenly realized what a foreigner I was. So in England, even the Metropolitan Police aren't armed. Hunting is kind of quite, very much a sideline thing, and is very controversial. Guns just aren't part of our culture. And I asked, as a parent, you ask yourself lots of questions about the safety and the well-being of your children. And in England, I'd done that, but I'd never thought that guns would be part of that question. And I know I have a good story idea when I kind of get a very immediate sense of the opening scene. That's always a tell for me that almost in a cinematic way. And interestingly, this book is currently, they're making a pilot for a miniseries, which is really exciting. I imagined it was the end of the summer. There was a barn, a bunch of children get together, there's a party, it's really hot. I remember it being so hot. It was 2016. It was so hot the end of that summer, and I was terribly morning sick. And the party goes really well, but at the end, the children go off, parents go off to the house to relax, the children go to the barn, and a child gets hold of a firearm and shoots another child, and the whole community reels from that. And so sitting in that book club, that idea came to me straight away. And then I listened to what was being said around me, and I realized that even within this group of women from quite a similar, I guess, socioeconomic background, there are very different views. So there was one family that went hunting at the weekends, and so rifles were just part of their existence. There was one woman who was a former Marine, and so she has a biometric safe by her bed, and she sees it as her lifelong duty to protect any community that she lives in. And that means that she needs to have access, she believes, to her firearm. There were others who were so anti-gun that they said, I wouldn't even allow my children to play with a water pistol. So there was the whole panoply of views. And it made me feel, wow, this is, good fiction, good drama is about conflict. And I realized that even amongst this group of lovely, supportive, warm women who come together to read books, if something were to happen to one of our children, our views were so different about firearms that our small community would likely, fall apart. And so it was just sitting there that first summer. It was shortly before, I just come out of England, just after the Brexit vote, just before the Trump vote here. So the world was kind of already starting to spin a little bit. And then I spent the next few years doing a lot of research about, I interviewed young police officers and their experiences of firearms. I experienced a really seasoned lieutenant who told me about his direct experiences of how it affects communities. I spent a lot of time with a border patrol officer that became a character in my book. The character's fictional, but a lot of the research came from that. He took me to a firing range, and for the first time in my life, I held everything from like a pistol to a rifle to fully automatic. So I felt I had to experience that. And I just dug deep into American life. And I remember some people saying to me, gosh, you're an outsider, you're an English woman. Why on earth do you want to write about guns in America? And what gives you the right to write about guns in America? And I suppose I have a philosophy of writing that sometimes when you're an outsider, you have a unique perspective into societies that are other from your own, because when you're living in the midst of something that's very familiar, you don't see it as clearly, I think. And I don't know if I got it right. I really hope I did. I did a lot of work and a lot of research and a lot of asking questions, but I think that outsider's perspective gave me, a clarity and also balance. My book isn't about pushing a particular viewpoint. Some people say, why isn't your book more pro-gun, or why isn't your book more anti-gun? And that's not the point. It's just about what it's like for a community to live with very different views when something terrible happens to a child. So that in a nutshell is sort of the inspiration and the research behind the book. And then lots of imagination, which is the fun bit where I can just embroider the characters and create a, you know, a fictional setting. And yeah.
Well, then another lovely aspect of the book and is also you have a community that really has a lot of people of many ethnic backgrounds, which maybe is not something that is of small USA Americana towns have as much of this kind of ethnic backgrounds. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
But it nonetheless, it was a very helpful way for me to say, hey, this is everyone's problem, no matter what, you know, are the backgrounds of people. These incidences and our children, we all have our same care and love and things like that. Talk a little bit about, was that a conscious decision to bring in, you know, all the different kinds of families?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very aware that in New Hampshire, particularly, it's, you know, there isn't a huge amount of diversity. But on the other hand, I thought why I wanted to create such a diverse community, and diversity in the sense also of sort of socioeconomic background, which I think there is actually in New Hampshire. You know, perhaps racially there is less, but as regards, you know, the wealth poverty gap, education gaps, things like that, you know, that's something I observe even here in Concord. I wanted to give everyone, highlight what would make everyone prejudiced for some reason. So the children are keeping the secret as to which child, you know, shot another child, and they're keeping it a secret because they know the fallout would be huge if people found out. And I wanted to give everyone an excuse to blame someone else, because that's what happens when something terrible happens. You know, it's human nature to kind of turn on your heel and try and find someone to blame. And the reasons that we use to blame people are often rooted in prejudice. And these prejudices are often irrational, and they're connected to the labels that we put on each other. So, you know, there are a couple of kids that are fostered by the local minister in the town, and they come from a really poor kind of Boston suburb where, you know, that their parents, you know, their mother was involved in drugs, and you know, that we know that there's a real drug crisis, you know, in New Hampshire, around the world. Actually, I've just around America, I've just watched the mini series Dope Sick. I don't know if anyone's seen that. It was such a terrifying eye opener as to how the opioid crisis came about. But I wanted to show how just because these small children come from an underprivileged background and are in foster care, and their parents or their mother was involved in, you know, in this sort of background, for some reason they would automatically be labeled as the children who would have likely have shot the child. And then there's another Muslim family, and it actually, you know, this is the most controversial. People say to me, oh, no one would ever build a mosque in like rural New Hampshire, no one would, you know, but actually it was inspired by, there's this site just outside Manchester in New Hampshire where there's this derelict site for a mosque that they've been trying time and again to kind of revive and rebuild. And I thought to myself, you know, how does a community react to, you know, this very big symbol of Muslim faith, you know, in a very physical sense, tangible sense, being built in their community? And, you know, that was stretching perhaps a little bit, you know, the likelihood, but on the other hand, it was rooted in that particular bit of research. And I remember very distinctly, especially after 9/11 and so on, that, you know, that all of a sudden the whole Muslim community was labeled as being terrorist or as having violent tendencies. And so I wanted to give that sense of very wholesome, very lovely Muslim family who suddenly become, you know, attacked for that reason. And then all sorts of others. There are a whole bunch of families. There's another family, they're the sort of eco family who live in the woods. The kids are homeschooled. They have a very alternative life. And those people are judged too, you know, those who are not mainstream, and perhaps they would have got involved because they don't have the same boundaries and parameters as kids who go to traditional schooling. So the diversity of community wasn't just about kind of race or religion, but it was just about backgrounds and the way that we, you know, we judge each other just because we're slightly different or we come from different backgrounds. And I wanted to break that down and to kind of drill down to the common humanity that exists in every community. And I think the one unifying thing is that, you know, if you're a parent, you love your kid, and you will put your kid and their safety above everything. And that's the thing that sort of comes to the fore in the book, despite people's backgrounds. So yes, that was the thinking behind creating a really diverse community, and also adding a bit of drama. You know, that's the purpose of fiction, is to kind of, you know, if you have a range of characters, that creates a bit more friction.
Yeah, you know, it's the use of all the different ethnic backgrounds and the socioeconomic backgrounds. And I mean, yes, this is a fictional piece, and yes, you're also, you know, you are trying to create that world that creates that story, which makes it so compelling. And you know, but in real life, that is something that is so interesting, that when tragedy does happen, when something does happen, people then start to see their community that they never saw before. I mean, I think that is, they never recognize their neighbors until they have to really recognize their neighbors, or, you know, their friends. That's a tragedy all of a sudden brings into focus. And so I thought that all the world you created, which actually you made a little map of your
Yes.
world, was so viable, was a way to really get a great story going that talks about all of America, I think. But
you know, I so like that you said that about how tragedy or even just heightened circumstances bring out the divisions in a community, because I actually talked to a book club based in Colebrook. So the book is in the fictional town of Middlebrook. I've invented that, but it is set in northern New Hampshire. It had to be near the border because there's a border patrol officer who works the Canadian border. And it's next to Colebrook, which is a real place. And this book group of women who come from Colebrook, they actually very encouragingly confirmed a lot of my research and my thinking. And they actually said the reality is actually on a gun level more extreme almost than I presented it. But one of the things they said was, politically, ever since the Trump election, the divisions in their community have just absolutely come to the fore. And that's slightly different. It's not, you know, a tragedy, but it's a heightened, you know, tense situation. And they said, suddenly we see our neighbors so differently, that these massive political divisions that we, you know, we didn't really, you know, we didn't acknowledge, or we pasted over, have turned us into enemies. You know, that people are like staking their, you know, their place in the world, and they're making very obviously who they support and who they counter. And so, yeah, you're right. It's just so interesting to see how communities, and you talked about the map. So the English version of A Children's Secret is coming out in April in England. And in that edition, they are publishing a map that a friend of mine who's a graphic novelist created. She read my book and she drew a map, and that was just magical. Can you imagine inventing something in your head and then having someone who actually maps it out? It's incredible. And my American publishers, they thought the map looked a bit too kind of friendly and wholesome. It took away from the suspense feel of the book, but I'll just hold it up for you. If you go onto my website, you can see it a bit more accurately, but it just gives you a sense of the town. I wanted it to be in a valley between the two opposing houses. So these are the main opponents in the tragedy and the story. And then I wanted to create a very kind of, you know, New Hampshire type town. There's a church, there's a small library, there's a pond with woods, with a dock, and every part of the town somehow represents something in the story. So even the geography of it somehow tells you something about the characters and the family and the nature of the family. And so the location for me was really important. So yeah, community was key.
I'd like to bring in Stacy right now of New Canaan Cares, because I know she's really into the whole family element. And yeah, I'm Stacy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for having me. We at New Canaan Cares really value our partnership with the library and are happy to be part of this discussion. And when Laura sent me an email, I said, oh yes, I'd love to read this book. And I was telling Virginia and Laura, I told my kids on a Saturday, I have a job, it's to read this book. This is part of my job. And honestly, I couldn't put it down. And I think what really struck me and stuck out was that in these times of tragedy that Virginia also touched on, we see division, right? We see so many people pointing fingers, judging. And I think people, whether they know it or not, they're constantly judging. So you see that. But in that goodness comes, I see where the children, yes, they make this secret, but they are children and they're looking to protect each other, even though they're all not really friends and one of them shouldn't have been there. And they still were looking out for one another. And I think oftentimes we want to protect our children, but yet they also know kind of how to handle situations that we don't think they know how to handle. And then as I look at the book in terms of relationships, honesty, belief, you know, friendships and the community and marriages and communication. Because as you dive deeper into the book, you see so many different layers of marriages that don't communicate, right? Couples who aren't talking to their children. And I think what also stood out to me, Virginia, was that as you work through the book and you come to the end, all of that opens up. People start to communicate, they start to welcome each other, they start to mend things in their own marriages, in their own family, in their own community, in their own life. And I look at that as such a positive, because the conversation is started, and things they didn't want to say to each other as friends, as parents, as spouses, has now changed, and I think opened up a whole world of communication. And I think communication is the key in anything, in your family, in your friendships, in your community. And to know it, you know, we need to talk about things, and we also need to respect each other when we talk about things. So it was really, you know, compelling to me to see how the book progressed and all those wonderful things that were intertwined in it.
Thank you so much. And I actually thought, in the light of that, there's a passage towards the end where my favorite couple are Ben and Caitlin, and actually it's at their party. They hold this party for their little boy, Briar, who is a bit of a social outcast. He's a little bit different from the other children, and the mother, and I identify this, you know, I think all mothers do, is desperate for him to be happy and to be integrated at school and to have friends. And so she holds this lovely back to school party before he starts middle school. And then, poor thing, you know, I describe her kind of, and I've had experiences of this, you know, making this perfect party with the perfect decorations and cakes, and she had a magician and a bounce house, and they completely went over their bank account to do it, and creating this kind of fairyland for these children. And then she just thinks they've pulled it off, and then it all goes horribly wrong at the end. But one of the most beautiful things to me is how their marriage kind of, you know, how they begin to question each other as, you know, the tragedy of this unfolds. And what was interesting, I think, in their dynamic was that they both grew up with guns in their background. So they both come from a very similar part of the world. They both sort of took it for granted that this is just how we live. And I think that's often the way that we take on board how our parents live, how, you know, the border patrol officer that I met in Maine and spent time with, he told me, oh, well, when my wife found out she was pregnant with our daughter, I went out and I bought a pink rifle. And to me, that was really shocking to hear. But for him, it was like, no, I want her to go to the range and I want to teach her how to shoot. And this is part of how we live. It wasn't a malicious thing. It was just so deeply ingrained in how he lived. And then what happened in the marriage is that Caitlin, the wife, begins to realize, I took all this as normal, but maybe this is not how I want to live. And what does that do to our marriage? And so there's this scene towards the end where a lot of the problems in the community have been resolved. And so the husband thinks, oh, we're fine now. We can just go back to how things always were. We can go back to normal. But actually, as we always know, when there's a tragedy that happens, you can't go back to normal. I actually heard someone say about the pandemic that the worst thing we can do is to just go back to how things were before, because we need to have learned from this experience and actually progress as human beings and you know, think about how we're going to live better. So I'll just read this little passage to you. So Caitlin is the wife, her husband is the border patrol officer, Ben. In the stable, Caitlin brushes down the side of Lucy's long grey neck. So they have a stable with horses. She does riding lessons. She's been here since 6 a.m. trying to avoid Ben. Ever since Lieutenant Messenberg called round to say that she was closing the investigation, he's been so happy, as though now everything is going to slot back to being how it always was. She leans her head against Lucy. What am I going to do? She whispers. She feels the warmth of Lucy's body, her blood pumping through the vein that runs down her neck. Katie? She hears Ben opening the door to the stable. Are you in here? And then he's standing in front of her, wearing his border patrol uniform, his pistol shining in its holster. Her stomach churns. So he was laid off work for a while the investigation took place. And so he's just put on his uniform for the first time again. You're going back to work already, she says. Just for a few hours to catch up on what I've missed. He's smiling, his back straight, his head held high. He needs this, she thinks, his job, to feel like he's making a difference. He comes over and kisses her. She doesn't pull away, but she doesn't kiss him back either. Not that he seems to notice. He's too happy, too sure that everything is okay again. I'll be back for the mosque opening, he says. We can go together. She draws away from him and goes back to brushing Lucy. You think that's a good idea, she says, not looking at him. Of course, we need to support the Sayeds. We need to come together as a community to show that this hasn't changed who we are or what we do. He really believes it, she thinks, that they can just switch back to how things were and pretend this week never happened. Katie? When she doesn't answer, he touches her shoulder. Is it still bothering you that Priscilla didn't want to talk? He asked. You know it'll take her a while to come round. So Priscilla's the mum of the kid who got shot. Her daughter was shot, Ben. I don't think she's going to come round anytime soon. He kisses her forehead. It's been a heck of a week. We're all tired. We need to give each other time. She has to tell him that it's not about being tired or about having more time. But she can't, because he looks so happy, because he believes that they're okay, that the 20 years they've been together matter more than one incident in their stable 6 days ago. He checks that the top button of his shirt is done up, that his belt is looped right. He glides his hand over his holster. She's watched him doing it a million times, making sure that the outer man mirrors the neat, ordered, dependable man he is on the inside. She's always loved seeing him in uniform, but none of it feels real anymore. It's like he's just dressing up for a part. I'd better go. I don't want to be late. He kisses her once more on the lips. We'll have some time together soon, just the two of us, I promise. She watches him walk through the stable and out of the door, hears him getting into the truck and switching on the engine. Lucy shuffles her hooves behind Caitlin and nudges her with her nose. Caitlin's heart hammers. Ben, she calls out and starts running. Across the valley, she sees Priscilla's cottage shining white in the morning sun. She catches up with his truck halfway down the drive. Ben, she yells, Ben. Finally, he hears her, stops the car and winds down the window. She comes to stand alongside him. What is it, Katie? She looks at him and she can feel it, even before she says anything, what the words she's about to say are going to do to them. I can't do this anymore, she blurts out. I can't. Her voice breaks. Katie, I want them gone, Ben. The guns, all of them. So that was just a kind of, a little snapshot of the tensions just within a marriage, of a couple who are very, very loving and very intimate and very close, and how they navigate this new world they find themselves in. And, I was so touched when I heard that Stacy and her organization wanted to be part of this talk, because for me, writing has a sort of a moral purpose too. It's quite unfashionable to say that. People say you should just write for entertainment, but I guess I write to build empathy, because I know that's what it does to me as a reader. And I think that really great books just help you step inside viewpoints that are thoroughly your own, different from your own, and develop a deeper empathy. And in a country, and if I may say, that is very deeply polarized, I think fiction can do that. It can bridge some of those huge divides between how we feel about each other in the world. So it's so heartening to hear the work that Stacey's doing in her community with families, with children. And Stacey just talked about, I think, a tragedy that's happened recently, about a child dying on having an accident on the ice and dying because their throat was slit by a blade, and how that, even when it's not a controversial issue, how much that makes a community real. And and I think thinking about communities and how they deal with these difficult issues is so important. So thank you, Stacey.
Thank you, Virginia. And I think, what's important to always remember too is, even though we may feel divided, we can always be brought together, and there's good and there's a lot that can come out of that. And I really enjoyed your book and the things that I got out of it and took away from it, because I think there's just so much to it.
And that's another dimension. So there's been a bit of controversy about the ending of the book. So I remember a few reviewers are like, the ending's too optimistic. I actually think there are lots of things that the community still needs to work really hard on. What I try to give a sense of is that they've decided and agreed to come together to try and fix their divisions. And I also believe, as a mother, and how I see my children operate, and I've done this in a number of my books. I've published lots of books under Virginia Mcgregor, and I often have a child protagonist, because I feel like children have a wonderful way of looking at the adult world and sort of highlighting to us what really matters. And these children, I think they come together and they show this community where their common humanity lies. And I'm a very hopeful, optimistic person. Hopefully I don't have kind of that blind Pollyanna-ish hope, but I've seen enough of how people deal with tragedy to know that there can be real progress. And it's nice to hear someone who's right in the thick of some of the hardest situations, like Stacey, say that that within these communities there is the chance of growth and change, even when there is a great deal of division. And that's what I wanted to mirror in my book. give some sort of hope too.
Thank you so much, Virginia. And thank you, Stacy. I mean, I knew that this was going to really highlight the strengths of this book, the story, the people in it, the character. And then, you know, when a tragedy does happen, it is, it's just a wonderful view of how the break apart happens, but then how people, and you do meticulously go with each character, Virginia, and explain out their, you know, what is going through their minds, and then how they heal and how they get back together. And anyway, I think it's such a worthwhile book. Just like Stacy said, I listened to it actually. I listened to it, an audiobook of it. I was riveted. I couldn't.
Did you like the
Oh,
the
she
accent?
did a fantastic
did.
job. She did all the accents beautifully. I knew each character who was talking. So she did a great job.
That's something quite
Yeah.
fun, I guess. Yeah, people often are interested in the ins and outs, the kind of behind the scenes things of writing. But one of the really, you know, a lot of writing is you're very much alone in your own thoughts for hours and hours. I've just finished the manuscript of my latest book, and it was just hours on my own of writing. But then you get to the fun, magical bits, and one of them is when, you know, an audiobook is being prepared, and your publishers send you a list of sound files to choose from. Really, they say these are the actors or the voices that we think might suit your book. And then which one do you think would best work? And my husband is a trained actor, so we always listen to them together. And it's so fun to imagine, you know, what voice, you know, what quality of voice will best bring to life this story. So I'm so glad that you feel that, because it matters, doesn't it? I don't know if you've had that experience. Sometimes some audiobooks, they just work so well, and others, if the voice isn't quite right, it can be off-putting. So
no, she was very skilled at changing her voice to be all the different characters. That was actually a marvel. And it enhanced the story too, tremendously. It was great. I highly recommend people to pick up The Children's Secret. It's a really great, compelling read. If you love small town stories, this is going to, this will really fit your bill. So thank you very much, Virginia and Nina Monroe, your pen name. So you brought some other books that you'd like to suggest. Since this is the book chat, we like to talk about other books to recommend for people. What are some of the books that you have enjoyed, Virginia?
So two books that there's a writer called Charlotte Mcconaughey, and two books that have absolutely blown me away in the last year. They're not easy reads. I come with a warning. They are quite raw and brutal in ways, but it's Migrations and Once There Were Wolves. And her writing is very suspenseful, but it's rooted in nature. If you love beautiful, you know, sometimes you read nature writing and it's very beautiful, but it can be quite slow. But because the plot in each of the books is so suspenseful, you have that beautiful language, that beautiful nature writing. They're both set in really kind of remote places. And you have the suspense of the story. And both of them are very, you know, for those of you who have a sort of interest in the environment, you know, she's one of those brand of writers who really is waking us up to ecological and environmental issues. So Migrations, you know, is about a scientist who basically traces, it's set in the future when it's heartbreaking, when many species have died out, and she follows an Arctic turn from pole to pole, and the mirroring of what's happening in nature kind of echoes what's happening in her personal life. And then with Once There Were Wolves, it's about a character who goes to Scotland to help reintroduce wolves as part of a way to help the natural environment there, because little did we know when we got rid of wolves thinking they were predators and that they were evil, that, you know, even in fairy tales they're presented as so malevolent, but actually, you know, what she uncovers is that wolves and their survival is intrinsic to maintaining a healthy ecosystem. And so you have that sort of environmental angle, you have the beautiful nature writing, you have hugely suspenseful. This particularly, you know, as I said, it has some issues of abuse in it, you know, that the main character has experienced some pretty horrific things. And so for those of you, it's not an easy read, but it's just very, I've rarely come across a book that is so beautifully written and so suspenseful. Then
Just to let you know, Charlotte Mcconaughey zoomed into here, maybe 5 months ago. She zoomed in from Australia to do an evening program with us, and she was stellar. Everything about her. Yes, we love her here.
I was so jealous.
Too.
I wish I'd known about the program. I would have zoomed in too. How wonderful.
I tried to get her to come at my migrations, but unfortunately, let's see, the pandemic hit, but then, so we were all kind of shut down, but then she also was busy on Once There Were Wolves, and she was in her writing bubble. So the agent just said she can't come out now. And then she had a baby.
Yes.
So we had to wait until Once There Were Wolves, but she's one of the faves here. She's a great writer.
Just such a talented writer. And then this is just very different. The People We Keep. And interestingly, it's an adult book, but it's told entirely from the point of view of a sort of late teenage girl. So it feels, I write young adult and adult, so it feels a bit young adult too. And it's really interesting to know, why it fell into the adult category rather than young adult. But it's a sort of coming of age story. It's a young girl who comes from a difficult, she grows up in a sort of trailer park with her father, who is quite dismissive of her mother's gone, and how she finds her way in the world. She's a musician, and the title drew me to it really. And it's about how sometimes when we're born into quite difficult circumstances and families, how we can rebuild our own people around us who see us and love us and allow us to flourish. And so that's just quite a touching story of a coming of age story of a teenage girl. Actually, this, Stacy, you might find this interesting. This is really heartrending too. So this is a memoir called Stranger Care by Sarah Sunti, I think how you pronounce it. And it's about an American woman. She's actually a journalist, a quite successful writer, but it's her journey of infertility and then adopting a child and then going through the foster care system, and how brutal that is, that there's a child that they absolutely fall in love with that's given to them, but because it's a foster child, the aim is to return them to their parents or to their mother, when actually, they've fallen in love with this child, and that really difficult wrangle. So that's beautiful. And then finally, something I just finished, and this is a bit like, because I loved Charlotte Mcconaughey so much, I was trying to look for similar things, and a friend recommended this, and it's called These Silent Woods. And it's the story of a man who lives in a little cabin in the woods with his daughter, and he's escaped the scene of a crime with her, and he's trying to live in secret. And I don't know if you've read My Absolute Darling, but it's similar a bit in that style. That it's a sort of survival book, and a bit like stories like Room as well. What is it like? It's an investigation of how a parent lives alone with a child in a very isolated setting. And again, beautiful nature writing, very suspenseful, and a really moving story of the relationship between a father and his daughter. So yeah, those are books that I've loved recently. How about you guys? How about Stacy? Or are there any books that you've particularly enjoyed recently, or anyone really, I guess?
Go right ahead, Stacy, if you have one.
I'm just excited, Virginia, for these books. I think you understand me well. I pinpointing which ones I would like. I love to read. I'm all about an actual book holding a book. And lately I've been busy, but my sister recommended a book to me that, oftentimes I wouldn't pick up. It was called The Midnight Library.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a very interesting story of kind of this woman who's teetering on heaven and earth. And if she took different paths in her life, what would happen? So it was just out of my wheelhouse. It was just very interesting and thought provoking. So I would say for right now, for me, that's the only one recommendation I could give.
Do you know a little bit about Matt Haig?
No, I don't, but his book has just gone crazy. Didn't know anything about him, didn't know really much about the book. I had heard that it was coming, but then it came and it was just off the shelves. So it sat on the shelves for a while, and then all of a sudden
it exploded. So Stacy, I think Matt Haig he's actually quite a mental health activist. So I think it'd be, look him up, because he writes how he started really. He talks very openly about how he was, this close to committing suicide, and then was kind of saved out of the jaws of that, and how he's come back to life. And he's written nonfiction, but a lot of fiction, and lots of beautiful children's stories, like middle grade stories. And he often looks at issues of kind of family and mental health issues, and he writes a lot about that. So he's also a wonderful activist in that area, and I think was much more famous in the UK, and I think the Midnight Library has made him famous in the US. But he's a wonderful human being, and has written, all his books are wonderful.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Virginia, because we too here, that's one of the things we do focus on, you know, obviously mental health. And, you know, right now there's a high rate of suicide, and we do have many programs focusing on, you know, kids talking about it and helping them work through some of these issues. So I'll definitely look into that. Thank you.
He's great. He's great.
So I have just two things that I want to recommend, but and these are books actually that sort of pertain to the same topic as The Children's Secret. They have to deal with, unfortunately, shootings, but they're amazing books. This one here, The Only Child by Rhianna and Nevin. I met her in New York as she was about to publish this, and she talked about it. And she was saying how one day, she's an advertising executive, and one day she found her son, 5-year-old, 6-year-old son, under the dining room table. And she says, "What are you doing under there?" And he says, "Oh, I'm practicing my lockdown drills." And so, you know, she said, "Oh, really? Oh, I see." And, you know, she being busy at work, she didn't realize how much they were doing lockdown drills in his school, because he really started to develop a complex of being nervous. And so she started to do more and more research. And so with The Only Child, this is a story about a school shooting. The young boy, it's in his point of view. He is 5 or 6 years old. So it's written similar to Emma Donohue's Room. The boy sees the aftermath. He's in his classroom and, oh my goodness, I've gone pink. I don't understand why that happens. Oh,
You look
so
great.
strange.
Yeah, you do.
Oh, thank you. Oh, look. See, I'm painting my house. That's why there's all this furniture behind me. And now I'm painted.
I love it.
This is my life. Oh boy. Well, anyway. Okay, so Only Child, it is about a young boy who does go through a school shooting. Unfortunately, his older brother, does die. And it's really his point of view of losing a sibling. It's his point of view of also his own trauma of going through what he did, hiding in a closet. It's also watching his parents enraged about what happened, the sadness of losing, seeing the mother getting quite upset that she has a vigilante kind of complex to get back at the person who came in to shoot. They found, you know, it really looks at all the aspects of, but it's only in his point of view. And, you know, it's a worthwhile read to just understand how a child may be thinking about what the parents are all doing, what all the community is reacting, and how it makes him feel. It's really worthwhile to get that point of view of something as tragic as what this fictionalized book goes on about. And then I hope you can see this through all the pink, but this is actually a DVD that I watched, and I think it just came out. I hope you can see this. It's called Mass. And it is a story about two couples, and they meet in a church room to discuss a school shooting. It's a year or so after the school shooting. One couple lost a child, was the victim of it, and another child was the one who did the shooting. And they are talking. Both children died in this episode during the school shooting, and they are just talking. It's the first time that they are talking together about what happened. And you are riveted to watching, because of course there's accusations being thrown, but then the parents whose child did do the shooting start to express the troubles of of being being the ridicule of the town when they themselves did not do anything wrong, and they also tried so hard to help that child, working with the schools, working with psychologists, working with and that they also were victimized at the same time. Not a dry eye. You can't, I mean, you're just so it's well done. I will warn you, it's hard to get through it. We had to do it in 2 installments. I had to stop it and then go on another day too. But I just thought, you know, kind of the same topic. They are worthwhile to watch because you do learn compassion for all the players in these situations. Wow, what an amazing what an amazing conversation we have had. I'm opening up to the audience if they would like to ask any questions. Just unmute yourself. We'd be happy to hear if you have anything to ask. I know a lot of people sort of shy away when it's time, and that's all right. We're just glad to have Virginia here to talk about her fantastic book, and also Stacy to bring all of her great knowledge and good works that she's doing for our community. And we're happy to be presenting all of this to you guys. Virginia, do you have any final thoughts? So you said you're working on another manuscript. Just a little hint on what that's about?
Yeah, well, so until now, I'll show you, my books have all been contemporary fiction. So my first book, which is actually being, they've just written the script for the film, which is very exciting, called What Milo Saw. And a little bit like Room and Only Child, it's an adult book told from the point of view of a child. So that was my first book. My second book was The Return of Nora Wells, about a mother who walks out on her young family and then comes back 6 years later expecting to pick up where she left off. Before I Was Yours these are all right down Stacy's street. I think that Stacy and I should just partner up. So this is a story.
I would agree. I read Before I Was Yours.
Oh, did you? So Before I Was Yours is a story of adoption, a white British couple adopting a little boy from Kenya. And then You Found Me is a bit about immigration, really, a man who's found in a London park and he's forgotten who he is, where he's from, what his name is, and he's found by a woman and her daughter, and they go on this whole journey of kind of self-discovery. And then my 2 young adult books, Wishbones and As Far as the Stars. So Wishbones actually looks at eating disorders in part and child's caring for their adults. So they're a young girl called Feather looks after her mother who's chronically obese and hasn't left the house in years, and it's because of a tragedy in their background that Feather doesn't know about, and it's about her falling in love and coming of age and all the rest of it. This is more of a love story. It's 2 teenagers who meet later in life, when they're 17, a bit older than the first one, and they go on this extraordinary road trip in the aftermath of both of 2 people in their lives kind of going missing. But so the reason I held all those up, so those are under Virginia Mcgregor, and all those books are about contemporary issues, because I guess, you know, I feel like my job might be not dissimilar to Stacey's job. I just do it on the page, whereas she does the harder work in real life, of like looking at really thorny, difficult issues in contemporary life. I've now, just in my book that I've just finished, taken a very different direction, just recommended by my agent, because I have this story in my background. So I was born in Germany. My mother's German, my father is English, and my grandfather was part of the resistance in the Second World War, and he was part of, I don't know about, you know, the Stauffenberg plot, but it was a plot in the 20th of July 1944 that tried to bring Hitler down, and unfortunately the plot failed and all the conspirators were executed, and he was one of them. And he was desperately in love with my grandmother. They both had other partners, other husbands and wives, but they had their love affair, and from their love affair came my mother and her identical twin sister. And this story has been kind of in the background of my family for a long time. And at first I said to my agent, gosh, I'm not a historical fiction writer. My friend Margaret Porter, who you can see, the most elegant one here, she's a picture of her here. She's a historical fiction writer, and I felt like I wasn't fully equipped to do that. I also find writing about the Second World War very difficult, because it's just such a tragic time in history, and also because I felt, gosh, surely everyone has read enough about the Second World War and seen enough films, but my agent assures me that people are still interested. And in a really interesting way, I thought, oh, this is going to be about historical fiction, and it is. But in a way, history often teaches us about modern life. So when I was digging deep into this, the book starts in 1932, and I read this really interesting article saying 1932 in Germany was quite similar to 2016 in America. So there's all this rhetoric of let's make Germany great again, and that sense of like rallying around this very loud, opinionated figure who sort of rallied the crowds and tapped into sort of a certain need that society had. And all of a sudden I realized, well, actually I am writing historical fiction, but really I'm also reflecting modern times, and also what it means to stand up against the things that are happening in your society, and a great personal sacrifice and cost. So I called it my scary book, and it still feels very scary, I think, because it's linked to my family, because it's set at such a difficult time, because I'm worried that I'm not enough of a historian. But I just sent it off to my agent, my first draft, and I've read a lot of historical fiction in the meantime, like All the Light We Cannot See, and all those types of books that are very warm and beautiful and convey that time in a way that's very humane. And I hope I've done a good job. We'll see if it ever hits the shelves, but I thought I had to do it. My agent kept saying, you need to write the story, you need to write it. And so I've given it my best shot, and it's really stretched me. In the meantime, I'm brewing lots of ideas for other contemporary books. So actually, I'm really interested in writing about the opioid crisis from the point of view, again, of families and children. So I don't know if it's the same in Connecticut, but in my community in New Hampshire, there are so many children who are in the foster care system because of the opioid crisis. And what's fascinating is that a lot of those children are being fostered into very different socioeconomic families. So I live in quite a well-to-do neighborhood with lots of doctors and lawyers, and just that sense of how it highlights, how a child is taken from one environment and put into a very different environment, and then possibly returned to that other environment. And that really interests me. So that's a book that's on the back burner, which is more in line with what I've written before. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, but yeah, that's everything that's brewing in my writing world.
Someone had put into the chat that
yes,
that World War II stories are still very popular. So right now you don't have a date when that could possibly be coming out. It's still still being looked at.
Publishing, because of the pandemic and everything, I think publishing is very slow at the moment, but it all depends. So, what Milo saw actually came out quite fast. It was my agent saw it, we polished it a bit, she managed to get a deal for it quite quickly. It just depends how fast it moves. So my agent will likely read it, get back to me, we'll do a polish of it together, then she will send it out for submission. So she'll send it out to maybe 10 different publishers in the UK, and then see if any of them will pick it up. And then it all depends, publishers try to publish books in a way that maximizes their chance of doing well. So usually from writing it to it being on the shelves can take about 2 years, I guess, depending, on various circumstances. But if I've lost all objectivity. I don't know if it's any good because I've been staring at it for so long. But if it is any good, and if it is likely to be published, probably in the next, it'll be probably published in the next couple of years. Currently the working title is Elizabeth and Wolf, because Elizabeth is the name of my grandmother. It's my middle name, Virginia Elizabeth Marina Wood, and Wolf was his name, and that's just the working title. But you can look out for it. See if it. I'd love to come back if it. I'll come back and chat.
Oh, good. Yes, definitely. Yeah. I thank you so much. We're coming up to the end of the hour. Thank you all for joining us. Virginia, great book. My goodness, really, everyone, please do check it out, or even Elm Street Books has copies of it. The Children's Secret, we have it in digital form as well, so you can download it onto your devices and either read it or listen to it. Anyway, thank you again, Virginia. Stacy, always really great to have you at the library. You always round out and make it very interesting and helpful to our whole community. Thank you.
Well, thank you for always having me, Laura. And thank you, Virginia. I'm looking forward to reading your books that you put out and staying connected. We're so lucky to have you. And we're so lucky to have the library to have these discussions. So thank you all.
Yes. Yeah. And libraries, I was going to say that I think books have saved me many times over through my entire life, but through this pandemic, I think I've read more than ever before. And I know people have had different pressures and different times, so that's maybe been a bit of a luxury for me, but I just, they've really got me through, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for the libraries in my community. They're the places that I bring my children to. They're where I go and I feel home. I walk in and I feel my blood pressure levels and my cortisol levels, just everything regulates, you know. It's, I guess it's like almost like going into church. I kind of feel like, oh, this is how the world is meant to be, you know, to be surrounded by stories that are, you know, tell you about the world. And so, yes, thank you for all the work that you do in the library. And I hope I can make my way to see you in person sometime.
We would love to. We're building a new library, so don't come until 2023 because it's, we're a bit of a mess right now. There's nowhere to park. Anyway, but we look forward to seeing you. Oh, we'd love to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, have a very lovely day. It is beautiful outside. I swear spring is maybe early, but no, we still have to get through the end of February and then go through March. I don't know what New Hampshire is going to be like, but I know that here in New Canaan and in Connecticut, it starts to warm up and we start to see little glimmers of warmth. All right, good to see everyone. And I will be sending out the after notes to everyone who is registered for the book chat today. Thanks again. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Stacy, while I still have you, just because your life is so much entangled in the things I write about, I was just wondering if I could have like your email or something like that.
Well, it's funny you said that, because I was hoping we were going to stay on, because actually in my work here, we are also our local prevention council. So I organize and oversee the New Canaan Coalition, which is comprised of 12 different sectors within our community. And our mission is to educate the community on drug use and misuse, focusing primarily on youth. So we have SOR grants focusing on opioids. So I have a lot of that back information. I was going to say to you, because I know I was on a chain with you, that I definitely would love to stay connected, because I think we can work well and do some great things.
Yes, we are. Sorry,
and you know, we could even have like a whole teen week or a whole focus on teen issues, or however you and Stacy can definitely talk, but we can highlight your books, maybe even get in Matt Haig, you know, in some of his books, you know, we could really put together a really nice, you know, prevention week, prevention month, however it can be. And we can zoom it out to a lot of people.
For sure.
You know, we can send it out to all of Connecticut, you know, it can be used. So
I would love that. I mean, I think bringing all of us together in as I mentioned, our partnership with the library, and we reach so many people, and that's what it's all about. So I would love to stay connected, Virginia, and obviously Laura, we're always connected, and I'm talking with Rebecca all the time too. So it's like we're kind of one.
Oh, I'm so glad to have met you. Thank you so much for thinking of me, and you're doing such incredible work. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia.
We'll be in touch.
Yes, I'll share everyone's email with everybody. So you'll see an email in a little while from me.
And you do I like the purple, Laura. It gives it a little.
I know. You think the walls would really look.
I know. It must be a filter that I've never known.
I have no idea. This happened 2 other times, but it went away. But this time it's staying. And I also have checkerboard on my face. I don't.
Never a dull moment with technology. Hey?
Never a dull moment. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.